Hi guys, welcome back to Set Speaks. In today's video, I will be giving a rundown and my commentary on the first episode of Loki. The beginning sequence of the episode starts with a sort of previously on. In this case, the pilot episode is connected to the time heist sequence from Avengers Endgame. While the sequence appears to be pretty much the same as the one shown in the film, they did include new shots of Loki, particularly of him reacting to things around him, like the Hulk being angry when he's refused on the elevator, and seeing the Tesseract being thrown across the room by Ant-Man. In the film, we're shown the sequence from the perspective of Scott Lang and Tony Stark, but in the show, we're seeing it from Loki's perspective. In doing this, the MCU shifts from the hero's perspective of Loki to Loki's perspective of Loki, and the events that led to him stealing the Tesseract in the first place. I thought that this was a pretty cool thing to do because the Loki show is, again, centered on Loki, and it marks the beginning of us seeing things from his perspective. I also think that this was a great way to start the show because it acts as a refresher to the ones who have already seen Endgame, but for new viewers, it establishes what led to Loki escaping and ultimately endangering the timeline. We also have to remember that this Loki we're seeing on the screen is 2012 Loki, who was the antagonist in the first Avengers film. He's not the Loki from Ragnarok or even Infinity War, because those events have yet to happen to him. So the one thing that is actually consistent about Loki, regardless of which movie you've seen him in, is that he's a drama king, to the max.
I am Loki of Asgard.
I mean, come on, the guy literally finds a rock in the Mongolian desert, runs to it, and stands up to make his great speech. He's so extra, but it's in a funny way. After escaping with the Tesseract to Mongolia, Loki is brought in with the Time Variance Authority, or the TVA. Again, we get to see him being dramatic and extra to the max.
Absolutely not. This is fine Asgardian leather.
Immediately after that, we get the robot scene.
What if I was a robot and I didn't know it?
So both of these scenes were very much comedic in nature, and I never really pictured Loki to be a comedy show, but it works without having to rely on it being cringy or, using secondhand embarrassment. What's also interesting was that this was where we start to get some philosophy in the show. The whole thing with Loki questioning if he was a robot but didn't know it, it sounds like an identity crisis. And so while there is this comedy at play, they also include some philosophical questions. But after the comedic scenes, we're once again reminded of the show being part of the greater MCU. In the Miss Minutes introduction video where the TVA's role was explained, there were mentions of the Multiversal War, the Timekeepers, and a Nexus event that could branch off into madness. These things are very much connected to WandaVision and the upcoming Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness film. The Nexus event that was mentioned is connected to the Nexus commercial in WandaVision, so that's the second time that the term Nexus has been used here in the MCU Phase 4. For those who haven't read the comics or don't know what a Nexus being is, Nexus beings are rare individual entities with the ability to affect probability and thus the future, thereby altering the flow of the universal time stream. These beings, each referred to as a Nexus, acts as the keystones of the multiverse and are crucial to its ultimate coherence and stability. Nexus beings are vigilantly watched over by cosmic forces such as the Time Variance Authority and the Timekeepers to be aware of any temporal changes that the Nexi may cause to the time stream and act accordingly. So this leads me and many others to believe that Doctor Strange, Multiverse of Madness, WandaVision, and Loki will all be connected to each other because they have either utilized or will utilize the concepts of the multiverse and the Nexus. We also get to see more philosophical topics at play, particularly existentialism and the whole predetermined fate versus free will thing in regards to how the sacred timeline and variants work. It was one of those scenes that made you go, huh. Although I will have to say that based off my experiences with organizations in the MCU, I don't think that the TVA is up to anything good. I mean, listen, S.H.I.E.L.D. was supposed to be protecting people and, doing stuff to help the world make a better place. but they were infiltrated by Hydra. And SWORD was also meant to be like protecting people, but you get their leader, who was Tyler Hayward, and he tried to fire a missile at Wanda and her kids. So unless I see proof otherwise, I am gonna be operating under the assumption that the TVA, not the good guys. Neither are the Timekeepers. I don't trust them in the slightest. Next, we get introduced to Owen Wilson's character Mobius. When we first see his character, he's in 1549 France, and he's investigating the attacks on some TVA agents. When he asks the little girl who killed those agents, she points to the devil in the stained window. Now, I should know better after engaging with certain fan theories after WandaVision. But come on, they were shoving Mephisto right in our faces. Like, I know there's a low chance of, like, it being actually Mephisto, but there was the devil in the art-stained window, and the little girl confirmed that it was the devil. And who else is the devil but Mephisto? After that, we're taken back to the trial scene with Loki and the judge, and he's being accused of crimes against the sacred timeline, but he points out that the Avengers were the ones who actually time traveled. So I was actually really surprised that Loki knew about this, but then it also made sense how he knew given how smart he is, and he's probably encountered this before. So according to the Timekeepers, the Avengers were supposed to travel back in time, and it was always supposed to happen, but Loki escaping wasn't meant to happen. This kind of frustrates me because I'm still very much bitter about Steve Rogers' ending in Endgame. I mean, shouldn't him choosing to stay back in time to be with Peggy like cause like multiple branches like of this timeline because he's essentially erasing her family and her kids? Like the whole explanation that just tries to justify him staying in the past and abandoning his friends and character development just makes no sense to me. Okay, I feel really strongly about this topic and I could go pretty much an entire video like ranting about this. So for now, I'll leave it at that. Pretty much the rest of the episode is Mobius acting like Loki's therapist while watching the file that they have on him. He asks Loki a very important question. Do you enjoy hurting people?
Do you enjoy hurting people?
And Loki doesn't give him a straight answer. He can't even look at the screen where it shows the damage that he caused during the New York invasion. I personally thought that if he did like to hurt people, he wouldn't have a problem looking at the screen. But he doesn't, and so that acting choice was very good because in that one single shot, even if you did see Loki as a villain, it does make you wonder, was he ever really a villain or was he just an antagonist? And because that bit was serious, the next part just had to be hilarious. The DB Cooper scene was one of my favorites in this entire episode, and I knew it was coming from the trailers, but I just didn't expect it to be shown like in the first episode. As a longtime fan of BuzzFeed Unsolved, I was eager to see how they were going to explain Loki being DB Cooper. And it was all because he lost a bet with Thor when they were younger. Like, somehow I'm not surprised, but it was still funny when you consider, like, all the other stuff that Loki has pulled on Thor when they were kids.
There was one time when we were children, he transformed himself into a snake, and he knows that I love snakes. So I went to pick up the snake to admire it, and he transformed back into himself, and he was like, yeah, it's me! And he stabbed me. We were 8 at the time.
You'd think that the rest of the episode would be consistently hilarious or serious, right? No, this episode sent me on a roller coaster of emotions. Because after the DB Cooper Loki, we had to see Loki watch his mother die because of his choice to send the Dark Elves after Thor. Now, I've never really watched Thor Dark World, but I did hear from a friend that in the movie, Loki had no idea that he was the cause behind Frigga's death, and so just watching that scene and him realizing he basically caused his mother's death was very heartbreaking, and I actually did shed a tear like when I saw that play out on screen. After that, they get interrupted by the TVA agent who brought in Loki. So when Mobius steps out of the room, naturally, Loki being Loki, he escapes. He goes after Casey, the TVA receptionist, because he has the Tesseract, and what follows is one of the funniest scenes in this show.
Oh, what's your name?
Casey.
Give me the Tesseract or I'll gut you like a fish, Casey.
What's a fish? What's a fish?
How do you not know what a fish is?
I lived my entire life behind a desk.
But what difference does it make?
Well, I want to know exactly what I'm being threatened with before I comply.
Death, Casey. Violent, painful death.
Okay.
Like, this god of mischief really asked for the guy's name just so he could personally threaten them. And then Casey doesn't know what a fish is. Oh my gosh, he's so adorable. Like, I love him already.
I've only had Arlo for a day and a half, but if anything happened to him, I would kill everyone in this room and then myself.
Loki then finds multiple Infinity Stones in Casey's desks, who confirms that they get many of these stones, but some of the agents use them as paperweights. This particular scene has caused many people on social media to be upset, because if the stones were useless, then what did Vision, Tony, and Natasha die for? But someone, I think it might have been one of my brothers or another person on Tumblr, they did mention that the reason the stones don't work in the TVA and why they're useless is because the stones have to be used in a particular timeline or space, and the TVA exists outside of those things. Loki then asks,
Is this the greatest power in the universe?
so I'm leaning towards the idea that while the stones are indeed powerful and not useless in the time and space that the MCU has existed in, there are greater forces and power at play. After that, Loki goes back to the room to watch the rest of his file, and this was yet another part I teared up at. You see him feeling remorse and sadness about his mother's death, how emotional he becomes when Odin tells him that he loves them, and how happy and fond he looked when Thor tells him he's not so bad. You see the hopes rising in him. This was his future and it was starting to look bright, until Thanos came on the screen. Loki looked horrified when he heard his bones cracking and he realizes that he dies like that. Nothing for me is more heartbreaking in any show, movie, or book than one character having like this hope, and you see it on their face that they're starting to have that hope, only for that hope to be crushed not long after. It was really heartbreaking for me to watch, and even though I've never been too attached to Loki as a character, you can't help but feel sympathetic for him. Plus, like, he had to watch himself die on screen. I don't know about you, but if I had to see myself like die on screen, that would mess me up a little bit. So I wouldn't blame Loki if he becomes a little bit messed up from that. Mobius enters the scene not long after this, and we finally get a straight answer out of Loki. He repeats the line about illusions being conjured by the weak and how it was all a play for control.
It's the cruel, elaborate trick conjured by the weak to inspire fear.
The desperate play for control.
While earlier it was directed at the TVA, this time he admits that that's what he does. Even the first time around, actually, when Loki says this line, he says it with so much conviction and feeling that you can't help but wonder, was he really talking about the TVA or was he talking about himself? And this time around, he does confirm that he was referring to himself. What that does is essentially it helps the viewer understand Loki as a character better. You know, he sees himself as weak, and so he has to use his power of illusion to make himself appear stronger because he wants to be in control. And I think that was the most honest has been the entire episode, so I guess Mobius's therapy stuff actually worked for Loki. In the episode's second to last scene, Mobius is seen striking a deal with Loki. There was a fugitive variant killing Minutemen, and he needs Loki's help to stop the variant, because Loki is the variant that they're hunting. First off, the term Minuteman kind of reminds me of that Disney Channel movie with the same name about those kids who invent a time machine and travel back in time to like fix their mistakes in high school, which was actually a really good movie. I totally recommend it. And second, what do you mean that Loki was the variant that they're hunting?
You didn't see that coming?
No, Aaron Taylor Johnson Pietro, I didn't see that coming because I actually thought it was Mephisto. Joke's on me because it's actually not Mephisto, so. But I'm not going to learn my lesson. I'm still going to think everything is Mephisto until proven otherwise. The episode ends with this mysterious hooded figure who traps some Minutemen in Oklahoma and sets them on fire before grabbing the reset charge thing. If that's Loki, why was he wearing a hood? Like, Loki's more likely to wear, like, his helmet with the horns than a hood. So, maybe it could be a different version of Loki, but I'm not entirely convinced. So that was basically the first episode of Loki, and the main thing I will say is that if you're an MCU fan like me, it's an emotional roller coaster even if you're not that attached to Loki before. The show was funny, it's serious, it's heartbreaking, but you've also got like mysterious and actiony vibe. Was that hooded figure Loki? If not, then who is it? And the end kind of sets it up perfectly so that if Loki takes Mobius's deal, we get to see them in action and engaging in a time travel chase thing. I didn't expect Loki to also include philosophical topics because it's not really something that the MCU is known for, but somehow it works because they're really starting to explore time traveling in depth as opposed to just the brief exploration that they did in Endgame. All in all, it was a pretty solid first episode, and I'm so excited to see how the rest of the show would go. And that's a wrap on my thoughts and rundown on Loki's pilot episode. Tune in next week for my review and commentary on Netflix's Shadow and Bone. Thank you guys so much for watching my video, and please don't forget to like, comment, or subscribe.